So we've gone through the scriptural examples, and now let's start looking into the early church fathers. And what we find is the first one I want to come to is the martyrdom of Ignatius of Antioch. And Ignatius of Antioch died in Rome about 107 or 108 AD. He was summoned there and went willingly and died in the arena. And they said that only the harder portions of his holy. I'm reading from something called the Martyrdom of Ignatius, and it's from chapter 6, and it says only the harder portions of his holy remains were left, which were conveyed to Antioch and wrapped in linen as an inestimable treasure left to the Holy Church by the grace which was in the martyr. Okay, so we have 107 AD. Roman Catholics are saying, here's evidence, early evidence of relic veneration in the early church. And in fact, I was reading from a lady's blog. It's called Catholic by Grace, and the title of her article is Venerating Holy Relics. I think I get it now. And she writes, and she says, unless I think the practice of venerating relics is something out of the Middle Ages, I have only to read a book called The Faith of the Early Fathers by William A. Jurgens, which contains an excerpt describing the martyrdom of St. Ignatius. Okay, so she's describing this exact incident here. So Ignatius of Antioch was killed. He was eaten by lions. They collected up just the hardest part of his remains, wrapped it in linen, took it back to Antioch. And she says, see, the veneration of relics goes all the way back to the beginning of the 2nd century. Well, the problem is, you read William Jurgens' Faith of the Early Fathers, and he says that the martyrdom of Ignatius, that is the account of it that I just read, it is ostensibly an eyewitness account, but it has since been found to be a fabrication of the 4th or 5th century. So it's just like when we were talking about the Mary as the Ark of the Covenant, or Mary in the Immaculate Conception, Mary in her sinlessness. The evidence that they typically bring forward for the early years, that is the first 3 centuries, for some reason it always ends up being a fraud or a fabrication. Isn't that interesting? These are people who are trying to convince us that we should be doing this because it dates to the apostles, and they keep on finding evidence that ends up being fraudulent. And they're willing to keep on bringing forward that fraudulent evidence so that we can come to the truth. And I'm sorry, we're not going to be brought to the truth by fraud.
Have they admitted
by fabrication?
Yeah, have they admitted that it's fraudulent, or do they still pass it around as legit?
Well, it depends. I think some people would avoid using the martyrdom of Antioch as evidence of early veneration. But this woman who said that she now gets relic veneration because she read about the martyrdom of Ignatius of Antioch in William Jurgens' book, The Faith of the Early Fathers. It says it on that very page that she read it. It says it right there. This has been found to be a fabrication of the 4th or 5th century. I think that what she does, she still assigns some truth to it, but more, well, I guess equally importantly, what did the early church do with Ignatius's remains? Let's find out. Did they burn incense? Did they line up and kiss it? Did they burn candles before it? Did they kneel down before it and bow down to it with a profound bow? Well,
I'm going to say no.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's a good guess. It's a very good guess. Jerome, in his book, The Lives of Illustrious Men, chapter 16, talks about the Ignatius of Antioch and his martyrdom. And here's what he says. He was put to death the 11th year of Trajan, and the remains of his body lie in Antioch outside the Daphnitic Gate in the cemetery. So what did the early church do with Ignatius's remains? They buried them. This is important because so far, what we have found so far is Jacob, Joseph, Elisha, Stephen, and now Ignatius. What did people do with dead bodies back then? Did they put them on altars, burn incense to them, light candles, kneel and bow and kiss them? No, they buried them. And what you don't find in the martyrdom of Ignatius is people running around holding his remains, putting them in relic rooms, and inviting people to come in and bow down before them and burn candles. It just didn't happen. So your guess
Yeah.
was a very good guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I also, yeah, I mean, that was a gimme. That was an easy one.